The great thing with drones is that you can put the camera wherever you want, as long as you're not in a no-fly zone. And with this freedom, you have so many different choices that it can become a little bit tricky to find compositions and good photographs. So I've come up with some ideas that will help you from a photography perspective to get better photographs. Like I always say in my videos, you need to go out and take photographs on a regular basis. So over the past 2 weeks, I've put the drone in the air pretty much every day. Well, nearly every day, apart from the really rainy ones. Now at the moment, I have the Mini 2, but it really doesn't matter what drone you have. They all do pretty much the same job. Obviously, if you want superior quality, you want to get the most expensive drone you can afford. But as a creative tool, the Mini 2 is actually a fantastic little camera and drone combo. Even though the battery life is getting better with new drones, you only have a limited amount of time to shoot. So planning is key with drone photography. This can be scouting a location in the day or going on Google Maps and Google Earth to look for some interesting scenes from above. It can be amazing what you can actually find in both of these apps. And with Google Earth, this is like a virtual drone. So you can almost work out your exact angles and the exact position you're going to park your drone to get that photograph. It's not perfect, and places that are quite remote can look a little bit weird with not quite the correct elevation, but it's definitely a good starting place. Another great resource is Photopills, and in the planning tab you can actually select your drone and it will give you the view you could expect at a location if you are shooting, say, bird's eye shots. If I'm out and about scouting, as long as I know I can legally fly the drone in that area, I might just put it up and have a look around. Whilst the light isn't great, I won't be going for that magnificent photo, but then I'm not limited by having to get it up and having to find a composition and before that light drops. Then I know I can go back to that location when the light is good and know exactly where I'm going to park the drone for the perfect shot. When you do take a photograph, if there's no definitive subject, it might look like a grand landscape. Sometimes it just doesn't look great to the viewer. So if you're finding that your photos are missing something, but you don't know what they're missing, you probably need to find a subject. This is basically something the viewer can focus on, whether it's a boat, a human in the shot, a pier, or an outcrop in the sea, just something that immediately shows the viewer what you were photographing. This makes it more relatable, it gives the photograph purpose, and it just makes it look like you were photographing with intention instead of just going out and randomly grabbing a shot. Now, I already touched on this in the planning stage, but once you have done all of that planning, you've got the shot in mind and you've got a subject that you're going to have in your photograph, then it's time to wait for the good light. And this is where you need to be really patient. Sunrise and sunset is the way to go if you want nice side light with a bit of color. So in knowing what the sun is doing and where it is in the sky, you can plan as to when you'll go to that location. Now, if the sun is high in the sky, so you go out in the middle of the day, it can give you a very flat looking image. When the sun is lower in the sky, it will be more side lit. That side light does emphasize the features of the landscape or the subject to give it more of that 3D feel. If we look at these three images, this first one was taken in the middle of the day. The second one was taken when it was cloudy, and this third one was taken at a sunset where the sun was coming from the side. You can see with the third one that it is actually quite a tall bit of prominent land sticking into the sea, whereas the first one looks really flat. The sun is coming directly down on the landscape. I use Photopills for this part of the planning, and with that AR function, you can basically work out when the low angles of the sunlight will potentially be hitting your subject when scouting a location. I've done a video on Photopills already, and I'll link it in the description. So be sure to check that one out after watching this video if you haven't seen it already. Now, I am curious to know, which one of these three do you prefer? Do you prefer A, B, or C? Let me know in the comments below. With most drones, the camera can look directly down, it can look parallel to the ground, as well as all of the angles in between. And some of the latest models can look up a little bit. So you can take advantage of all of these different angles by looking at your subject from different vantage points. And this is why it's so important to go out scouting and to fly your drone whilst you don't have that short amount of really good light. And like I've already said, shooting on a regular basis is the only real way you're going to learn about what works and what doesn't, as well as what you personally like. Top-down shots can work really well when you look for patterns, angles, and reoccurring shapes and subjects. And if you can place a person or an item in the shot, this can sometimes add to that photograph. It kind of gives it scale. When flying your drone, if you're miles away from your subject, this will reduce the time you have at your point of interest. So finding a good vantage point is crucial to getting your drone exactly where you want it, and almost giving you enough time to be able to get the shots that you want before you have to fly it back to where you are. So in the planning stage, as well as finding a good potential photograph and a subject, make sure you know where you can sit when taking the shot. Make sure you're not too far away. Also, the height you can fly the drone to is limited by your takeoff point. When I find a location I like to photograph with my drone, I always look for the highest vantage point I can launch from. All places have a height restriction, so if you're at sea level, it will be 90 meters, 100 meters, or 120 meters, depending on the restrictions in the country that you're flying your drone. But if you're standing at the top of a 100-meter cliff, you'll still only be able to fly it up to your maximum height, but from your position, not from sea level. And this kind of figures because if it was a maximum of 100 meters from sea level and you were in the mountains at 2,000 meters, you wouldn't technically be able to fly the drone at all. So choosing where you launch from is really important. As drones and the little cameras they carry have developed, it's great that the companies have incorporated some of the more intermediate sides of photography. The pro modes are good as you have control over the settings, and I mean all of the settings, as well as shooting in RAW, which will help by giving you all of the data that the sensor collected. But another feature that is well worth knowing about is bracketing. You might be shooting a landscape with a really bright sky in the distance, and if your camera has some of this in the frame, the last thing you'll want is the sky to be completely white with no detail. Or you might change the settings to get the sky exposed right and find that the landscape becomes really dark. If you were to try and edit these shots, you'd get either blown out sky or a loss of detail and raised noise levels in the land. And this just makes for a bad photograph. Bracketing helps alleviate this. What it does is take 3 shots in quick succession at different exposures. The darker one will retain the details in the highlights, the middle one will get good exposures for the correctly exposed parts of the shot, and the brighter shot will keep the details in the darker parts of the photo. Then when you get them back into your editing program you use, it will be able to easily blend these together seamlessly, giving you much more details in the shot, showing all of this detail in the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. Now this next one isn't talked about that much, but if you're concerned about how small the sensor is in your camera, giving you more noise than maybe your DSLR or mirrorless camera, then stacking can help with this noise. I did a video on image averaging recently, and I go over exactly how you do this, and I've linked it at the end of this video as well. Basically, you take about 10 shots from exactly the same place, and then when editing your photos, you take a mean or median average of all of the shots stacked into layers. This will get rid of a lot of the noise from your frame and make the photograph a lot cleaner. Also, if you like long exposure photography, you can use this to kind of fake that long exposure look. This is a single shot, and this is 10 shots stacked. If you look at the sea, the second one looks more like it was taken over about 2 seconds, blurring all of that wave motion. And this is a really cool way to make your drone shots stand out. Another reason you might want to do this is if you're shooting as the light is dropping and the camera is bumping up the ISO, giving you more noise in your frame. If that is the case, just take 10 shots or so and then stack them together in Photoshop or in the editing program that you have. And if you shoot with one of the cheaper drones that has a much smaller sensor, this is well worth knowing about.